Thank you, Leslie. That is a way better story than the time that I found a goat on my roof, which just, if that sounds evil and frightening, it's because it was. Our next storyteller is our very first three-time storyteller. So for those of you counting at home, he's told a story every single time. I see you tapping your papers. Richard served in India in Group 20A from 1965 to 1967 as a rural public health volunteer. So, Richard, take it away.
Okay, I didn't want to disappoint anybody here, so I brought my notes. Pay no attention to them. Now, most of you here are Peace Corps volunteers, returned Peace Corps volunteers, or are thinking about going into the Peace Corps. So this is a story about how people got into the Peace Corps, how we all got into the Peace Corps from about 1963, seeing to about the late 1960s. So the process, this was the process. The process was, one, you put in an application. And in the application, you listed 6 references and so on and so forth, indicated what country you would like to go to. And at that point, after that, you were given an invitation to become a trainee. And then if you survived the training, you actually became a Peace Corps volunteer. So you went from candidate to trainee to volunteer. And therein lies the story, because this amounted to a selection process. Indian 20A received, once you were selected for going to training, we all received an invitation from Sergeant Shriver, signed by Sergeant Shriver. Now, don't give me that blank look, please. It's not that long ago. Also, before we went to training, before we got that letter, we had to undergo a test which tested our general knowledge ability and our ability to learn a foreign language, which at the time when I took that test, I thought my ability to learn a foreign language was nil, because my ability to learn French had proved to be pitiful. Mais maintenant je parle un peu. So we were off for 12 weeks of training at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee in 1965. And during training, the selection process continued. Basically, we were watched all the time. From our training period began at 7 o'clock in the morning and lasted to 10:30 at night, 5 nights a week, 5 days a week. On Saturdays, we got a break. It only lasted till 5. And Sundays was like a holiday. We only had to watch movies about India for about 3 or 4 hours. Watching over us were the selection officer from Washington, D.C., and present on the staff were 4 returned Peace Corps volunteers, and these volunteers were from groups labeled number 1, India 1, Philippines 1, etc. And the assessment staff. We don't want to forget the assessment staff. We had a field assistant officer, an assistant field assessment officer, a psychometrician, 2 psychiatric consultants, and a medical consultant. On the first day of training, we were all assembled in a large room, and we received a welcome from the psychiatrist, who was the head selection officer from Washington, D.C., and he said, I had never heard this before, look to your left, look to your right, that person will not be here in 12 weeks at the end of training. And then he said, no, don't look around, I'm talking about you. We were not millennials at that time. You know, they didn't care about feelings. When we were in training, this is interesting, our references were checked. And who would check our references? But as near as we could figure out, representatives of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They spoke to our teachers. They spoke to our girlfriends, our boyfriends, our friends. They spoke to anybody that they could find, trying to find what we would call these days dirt on us. We also took the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, which is this is really complicated stuff, which is a standardized psychometric test of adult personality and psychopathology. Each of us was assigned to a shrink. That's 20th century talk for a psychologist or psychiatrist. The bottom line was we were watched all the time. And at the end of a 6-week period, there was a selection. And how we were told whether or not we were to remain was very interesting. We came into the recreation room, and we all had little slots for mail. And each and every one of those slots had an 8.5 by had an envelope, one of those white business envelopes. Envelopes were something where you put letters into, and you put it in the post. And inside was a note and said, "Go immediately to room. Go immediately to room 1, 2, or 3." And depending what room you were assigned to, that decided your fate. So I immediately see, oh, go immediately to room 3. I dashed off to room 3 like a madman. I get in there, and there's nobody else but me. Not too good. Well, in about 2 or 3 minutes, more and more people came in, and we began to realize they couldn't get rid of all of us. They could, but others went to a room where they had some sort of a temporary hold. They were okay, just a little upset. But the last group, they went to the room for those people who were not chosen to become volunteers. They were washed out. They were not selected. They were gone that afternoon. We never saw them again. They were packed up, shipped out. We suspect that they were put on rocket ships and they were just gone, just like that. Don't worry, there's more. So the whole process was a very nerve-wracking situation. After the first selection board, we went off for 2 weeks onto an Indian reservation where we did such interesting things as build outhouses, cooked commodity food. Commodity food was food that was given to poor people, and some of us were lucky enough to skin and eat squirrels. Basically, the Indians took care of us. They invited us to their homes, showed us how to do things. So it was a two-way reciprocal street. Basically, at the end of that 6 weeks, the word went out, well, we already knew, don't talk to anybody who might have anything to do with you being selected out. Always be positive, always be friendly, and try to be as likable as possible. Now, for me, this presented a problem because I was born in New York City. I grew up on the east side of Manhattan. I went to public school on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. I went to junior high on the east side of Manhattan, and I went to New York University. And when I realized that for the next 3 months, I could not say one sarcastic, cynical, or facetious thing, I knew I would have to do the best acting job I could possibly do in my entire life. Then we had our crazy incidents. We were used as an audience for Lady Bird Johnson when she had to do a speech in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. They brought us out. We went. We listened to Lady Bird. She was very nice. And at the end, we had a reception line for her, a greeting line. And she goes down the line. She's saying hello to everybody. And Phil, my friend Phil, commits a cardinal sin. Instead of just saying "pleasure to meet you," he says, "It's a pleasure to meet the power behind the president." Oh. So Lady Bird's very nice, was very nice about it, and she says, "Oh, no, we share power. I'm in the background, so on and so forth." The reporter heard it. She starts writing down stuff. Phil goes out of his head, says, "No, don't print that. Don't put it anywhere." Grabs a hold of her. She's running down. She's trying to move away from her. We all thought he was toast. That was it. Somehow, well, he made it through. The next day, he actually was selected. The next day, he comes to training. He's got a large coat on. He opens up the coat in front of the entire group, and on it says Peace Corps dropout. The other thing we had to do, how to get yourself deselected? We had a Halloween party. One of the fellows came dressed as a girl. 1965. Not the best thing to do in 1965 when you're working for the United States government. we had to, we grew chickens. We raised these chickens from eggs, little chicks and so on and so forth, built them a chicken house, chicken coop. At the end of training, we were told that we had to, we were going to kill those chickens and eat the chickens. I got my chicken, it was upside down, tied him up, grabbed him by the neck, and I had a little conversation with the chicken, and I said, I don't know you, chicken, but I don't give a damn, because if I don't slit your throat, my next stop is Vietnam. You may not realize it, but service in the Peace Corps did not exempt you from the armed services. It was only a deferment, so that you could, and many people were, drafted right out of their sites, out of their host country sites, and off into the Army. And several of the people in my group were drafted and went into the Army. One actually won a medal. Then we had the boundaries role playing, where the ladies in the group were subjected to host country nationals trying to make a pass at them, and and they had to figure out how to get out of it. One of the ladies just stood there and giggled. I knew, she's not long for this world. And the other thing, which was really wild, was that they showed us a film on what was called venereal disease in those days, and today it's called they're called STDs. This is like the grossest film. I'm sitting there taking notes. Everybody else is sweating. Years later, I realized, and some other people in the group explained to me, that they didn't give a hoot whether we knew about venereal, where they came from or what happened. What they were really trying to do was scare us from having any sort of relations with the host country nationals, and especially not with the girls or ladies in our group. Well, for India 20A, that sort of stuff was wasted, because it was 1965, and the ladies who were part of India 20A made the Vestal virgins of ancient Rome look like a bunch of sluts on vacation in Las Vegas. Well, at the end of 12 weeks, we had our second selection board, and we came out of class. We were walking down the road, and there were all the trainers lined up. Instead of using the cubby holes, they handed everybody an envelope, and in that envelope were the room numbers. By that time, everybody knew what the room numbers signified. And so people were walking together in twos and threes. Some people were crying. The same routine. That afternoon, people were just gone. We started with 64 people as trainees, and we went over to India with 37. So the rest of 37 people were selected, and the rest were deselected. And that is the deselection process in those days in the 1960s. Thank you.